Eddie Hearn was trying to lick up to Adam Smith.
Can't just forget about when no one wanted boxing, when it was on its arse. Sky were the only people that were consistently backing the sport. Sky were the only people that were consistently backing the sport. Can't just forget about when no one wanted boxing, when it was on its arse. When it was on its arse.
Hi, you're with Bear Friday, Body Language. This is one of the most detailed, researched videos I've made. I hope you listen to it like a podcast. I'll try and put some relevant images up, but I'm trying to avoid YouTube demonetization or copyright strikes. I hope you share this video. I want this information, this side to the story to get around. There's so much bull, and I'm not going to use swear words because I don't want to be demonetized, but there's so much bull in boxing that you have to let a lot of it slide. But some so big that to call it out requires a bit of research and time. A long video, so here it is. Eddie Hearn and pay-per-view. I call bull. I'm calling you out. We're going to call it We Need to Talk About Pay-per-view. So, we need to talk about pay-per-view. Pay-per-view requires technology. So first I'm going to have to do a quick abridged history of television. Throughout this, I've written a script here and done some research, and if you want to contradict me or have opinions, then leave it in the comments. I'm not saying I'm perfect, and I'm not an expert on the history of television, but here we go. Early TV in both America and the UK was broadcast through analog signals via radio waves. Transmitters sent signals and aerials received them. This meant there was no pay-per-view because you can't measure or regulate who receives your signals. If you've got an aerial, you receive the waves. In the UK, the BBC, the British Broadcast Company, already broadcast radio to millions of homes, and in 1936 became the first television broadcaster in the UK. This public service was and still is funded by a licence. In simple terms, if you have a TV, you pay a compulsory licence fee, a kind of TV tax. So everyone chips in for the service, and then all BBC broadcasts are sent out for free. This was a national, analogue, or terrestrial broadcast service. The BBC was the sole broadcaster up until a commercial channel, ITV, was launched in 1955. So the UK got the first TV in 1936, but 5 years later, in New York, America got their first television broadcast service, a commercial station called RCA, and after World War II, with the standardisation of broadcasting technology, a whole nation of different broadcasters sprang into existence, with different states getting their own colloquial stations, and also some larger channels driving national syndication of content. I'm not an expert on American TV, so that kind of covers the early years bit. Except to point out that cable TV actually started in 1948, but was only really used to connect geographically remote areas like Arkansas or Oregon, and didn't spread into urban areas until the 60s and 70s. In the UK, in 1938, an analogue cable TV signal was launched to connect Bristol and Hull, another strange anomaly. In America, subscription cable TV really got going in the 80s when commercial broadcasters started to offer dedicated channels and expanded into the big cities. And with this cable, companies were finally able to discriminate between customers. You could finally charge someone for switching a channel on or off at will. Pay-per-view TV was born. The first pay-per-view event was in fact a boxing match, a quite famous one between Hagler and Hearns. In America, you had vast territories, national syndicated channels, and cable fast becoming a universal service. In the UK, there was a smaller choice of channels that were free to view and commanded larger audiences. In fact, you couldn't run a pay-per-view channel in the UK at this time because there was no cable. There was no private paid television service until Sky. Sky was essentially cable TV for the UK. Satellite technology now allowed a private company to selectively broadcast to individual homes, or boxes, and to charge a premium for this service. And that didn't happen until 1994. Now, why would anyone want to pay for Sky when they got all they wanted already for free? At the time, boxing was being broadcast on both the BBC and the ITV networks. And yeah, for free. So Eddie Hearn would be going mad. Surely nobody earned any money if it was available for free. How could that be sustainable? Well, in the case of the BBC, taxpayer money, or the licence payer money, would be given to the public service broadcaster and allocated to sporting events. They would pay the broadcasting fees. If there were just one broadcaster funded by the taxpayer in this market, that would be a problem, as they would have a monopoly on broadcasting rights and effectively choose the price. Fortunately for the UK, there was a competitor. ITV was a commercial channel who would compete with the BBC for rights to broadcast boxing. This meant there was a fair and competitive marketplace. The price paid to license a sporting event for broadcast was governed by market forces. Commercial channels could and did exist, and they also broadcast a range of sporting events. Due to the popularity of boxing, ITV had a reasonable budget to spend on the sport, fueled by premium primetime advertising revenue. When you consider the large audiences and popularity of the medium, TV, this provided valuable advertising space, and advertising bought in large sums. The boxing events themselves also profited from selling advertising space, be it the ring mat or the turnbuckles. Yeah, advertising. So it was this, plus ticket sales, and not forgetting the broadcast licence fee, that made up the revenue for a fight. So according to Eddie Hearn, that pile of cash must have been a real pittance, because he reckons that pay-per-view ensures the boxers get paid. Well, no. Whilst the murky world of prize fighting did have some crooked players, you could, in the 80s and 90s, make a decent living from boxing at a high level. There was money in the pot for big purses and undercard fighters. Top names won sponsorship deals and appeared in advertising, boosting their revenue. This was made easier for them as they were household names because the boxing was on terrestrial TV for free. Even budding new prospects could reach the masses. Okay, there's not the same level of silly money as today, but it was still big time. People were able to eat. These were the days of the Barry Hearns slave contracts, though. A discussion for another video, except to say that I don't think promoters had more power back then. I just think they were able to be more exploitative. And that's probably a discussion for another video. It seems that Barry Hearn was implying that there's less exploitation of fighters these days. Maybe that's the case, or maybe it's not. The British public was able to enjoy world-class boxing events for free, and the boxers were fairly compensated, in the main, or at least the money was there for everyone to get paid, if you trust your promoter. At this time, there were a few promoters putting on shows of national interest, and their product was being bought by the terrestrial broadcasters. So why do we need pay-per-view? That's what this is all about. Why would you pay for sport when it's free on terrestrial TV? And I remember these days fondly of all sitting around the television to watch Eubank and Ben, to watch Frank Bruno as a family. Everyone interested. I remember those days fondly. So all was good until Sky stepped in. In the 90s, Sky Television offered customers a new service, satellite television. new technology similar to the American cable network, but using satellites and receiver dishes. New channels, entertainment, movies, and of course sports. Sky bought the rights to some of the biggest shows. I remember The Simpsons from when I was a kid. The majority of people, me included, couldn't watch the first few series of The Simpsons in the UK unless our parents paid for Sky. I got copies recorded on video passed around, and a member of my family did get Sky, and I went round to watch it on the weekends. Sky also made a big move in the world of sport. Without doing an entire video and any research on the Sky portfolio, at this time there was a lot of money behind Sky, and there still is. Their main target was football. The top tier of English football formed their own breakaway group in order to provide Sky with a neat package to buy. Instead of investing in the full Football League system, they only wanted the top. So the Premier League took TV rights for live top-tier football and sold them to the highest bidder, Sky. Football had survived for probably 100 years on ticket sales, advertising, sponsorship, terrestrial TV rights and merchandise. But now the Premier League was taken away from the general public and put behind a paywall. My granddad, who fought in a war, couldn't watch his favourite team on grandstand on a Sunday anymore. The same thing happened with boxing, in a way, only boxing is not regulated by one overarching governing body. Prize fighting is a relatively unstructured and unregulated affair, generally moving with market forces rather than ethical concerns. Instead of one governing body and rule set, there are many. Lots of competition, lots of independent parties, lots of belts, lots of organisations. So there's no need to form a breakaway league. You just sign deals with the promoters and broadcast their shows. Sky used their financial clout to sign up the most popular. I believe in the value of sport in a social context. Not only should children have access to grassroots sports facilities, sport provides occasions where we can come together and bond over something positive socially. Investment in sport, in the main, comes from government or charitable funding. Only some sports enjoy the financial success that allow them to fuel their own grassroots development. And not just grassroots involvement, but the power to help take a talented child and develop them into a professional athlete. When you look at someone like Anthony Joshua, a product of an amateur boxing program coached at government and lottery-funded projects to compete for Great Britain at the Olympics, and then winning gold, something that we could all share in as we all enjoyed this world-class sporting event for free, collectively on the BBC. I believe that the access to enjoy the top-level sport should be for all. The generation that fought in the war for freedom should not be charged money to enjoy the communal prize of peacetime sporting competition. And the people whose tax money, whose social investment has produced these athletes, these people, the general public, should be able to enjoy and share in the experience of their ongoing career. The nation that invested in the development of these athletes should be considered shareholders, and we should have a right to view their future career in sport. Maybe even some of the prize money should be reinvested in the next generation as a matter of course. When Sky took the sports that were beloved and enjoyed by the general public and bought the rights to them, they put them behind a paywall, and then there were consequences. And the consequences for boxing were massive. The main consequence was a rapid decline in the popularity of boxing. No more could everyone be part of a collective experience. We couldn't all get together and watch the boxing unless your mate had Sky. And in the early days of Sky, it was not the norm. In fact, its cost made it a luxury that only a small percent of the population could justify. Of course, in time, Sky gained more customers, but for a few years boxing was hamstrung by exclusivity. Now, Eddie Hearn understands the importance of building a fighter in terms of public exposure, getting the name and the face known to the punters, creating a storyline and a narrative to help sell the product. Back then, before IFL and YouTube even existed, Sky took all this profile building marketing and actually made you pay for it. There was no internet, no place to view interviews or fight highlights. Even the news had to show still images or pay Sky for the footage. It led to a massive decline in the popularity of boxing among the general public. Now, Hearn will not admit that Sky hampered boxing, but he would tell you that boxing lost popularity due to a few duff pay-per-views. There is something there to that line, and it brings us back onto track to talk about pay-per-view. Remember pay-per-view? That concept from America, charging individual households and controlling their access to broadcasts, made possible by cable technology. Sky, the broadcaster, already made you pay to view their service, but now you could pay to view a movie on top. You could pay to view a porn channel, and of course, you could pay to view sport. The disgraceful thing here is that Sky already made you pay a subscription. So whilst a terrestrial channel can only generate income from advertising space, or in the case of the BBC, the licence, Sky forced you to watch the adverts and charged you to do so. Sky therefore has a bigger budget. Then on top of charging you to watch the adverts and your subscription, they introduce pay-per-view. They don't do this so they can put on a bigger or better show. Let's not pretend that huge level boxing events didn't exist before pay-per-view. When an interest in a fight reaches international levels, those events are big. You don't need pay-per-view money to make them big. So they introduced pay-per-view, not so they could put on bigger shows, and not so they could pay the boxers more, so they could make more money. And because they could, by monopolising the sport and hiding it behind paywalls. Once Sky had bought exclusive rights to broadcast the sport, they held it to ransom, with increasingly higher demands. You see, the beauty of sport, unlike a movie, is that people have a real emotional investment, and they want to experience the event live. And of course, they place bets. In recent years, gambling seems to have spiraled out of control, with a multitude of online gambling sites grubbing for your money. The huge profits they generate has created a mini bubble in the advertising industry surrounding the sports on which the bets are placed. Something that is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. So Sky makes money selling you access to sport, and it makes you watch adverts after you pay an additional cost to view the event. As a result, in financial terms, the customer is clearly worse off, having to pay more and more to watch top-level sport. The sports people do earn inflated money, getting into the ridiculous millions like Premier League footballers and some of the top boxers. Whilst it's great that promotional company Matchroom can make millionaires out of young prospects like Buatsi and Campbell, it seems the gravy train is almost overflowing. Remember, for every pound a boxer earns, the promoter and manager skim off their percentage. So one boxer can become a millionaire, but off the back of a stable of fighters, the promoter manager will always earn more and more. The more money put into the kitty, the bigger their skim becomes. Their percentage is earned as a middleman, organiser, promoter. When a fighter retires, a new hero is presented to the public, and the promoter goes on skimming money. Fighters become products to sell to the punters, and then profit from. Huge money is now a lever on both sides. The promoters and networks have leverage in their ability to promote and pay a fighter. The fighters have leverage in their ability to sell a pay-per-view fight. This distorts the sport, and someone can be a brilliant boxer but dull as dishwater and end up paid less than a bum fighter who can drum up support on social media and sell tickets. The real boxing enthusiast loses out, as it's not that the best fights get made, more the most profitable ones. Just look at how Deontay Wilder has reigned as a good regular earner, rather than risking his long-term financial viability in real defences, or how Anthony Joshua was able to sell out Wembley fighting cherry picks when the arguably better fights took place at the much smaller O2 and therefore generated far less revenue for people like Dillian White. A quick side note, I referred to the boxing enthusiasts then, the real fans. Eddie Hearn calls them the hardcore and differentiates them from the casuals. This is both in reference to their market research, indicating some customers will pay any price because they will simply not miss a fight. You can count on their money and squeeze them hard. They're the hardcore. The casual is someone who may or may not buy your pay-per-view. You would think that a promoter would value the hardcore or loyal customer more than the casual. However, more time and money is spent attempting to win over the casual customer than is spent appeasing the hardcore. The hardcore will always pay. The rest requires some persuasion. This is another reason the real fans miss out on the real fights, because promoters would rather do the easy and push the big star versus my nan or some YouTube fight to casuals than break backs and banks to get two big names in the ring to face off. However, hardcore and casuals are not just ways to sort and label customers, it's also a very clever bit of psychology. By presenting this concept of two groups, Eddie lets you decide which one you fall into. Are you a hardcore fan, knowledgeable and savvy, or just a dumb casual? Well, unless you want to stay a dumb casual, you'd better pay up your pay-per-view money like the real hardcore, right? You do want to be hardcore, don't you? And therein lies the manipulation. It's a sales technique, a piece of devious psychological trickery that the average person, on percentages, will fall for. Even if they don't buy the pay-per-view, they'll feel the wound to their ego. None of us wants to be a casual. We all want to be in the hardcore. That's why we watch IFL on YouTube, isn't it? So, pay-per-view only existed on Sky in the UK, and they had that power to bill customers individually and tailor the broadcast packages due to the technology. And once they secured exclusive rights to sporting events, they exploited their assets to the best of their ability, as any good capitalist company tend to do. Only they'd kind of engineered a mini monopoly of sorts, something that should be frowned upon and regulated in free market economies. A story for another day. There were different promoters in competition to be on Sky, to get the big ticket to win the big broadcast deal. Matchroom was able to grow and become powerful, and maybe I should do a, how Matchroom grew video. And then, all of a sudden, the landscape shifted. After years without a realistic competitor, Frank Warren launched Box Nation. No, I'm joking. Box Nation was never a realistic competitor to Sky, but it did mark the start of an influx of realistic competitors. Their original advantage of technology-driven service and exclusive rights buy-ups has become stale, and a new generation of technology-driven services threatens to supersede them. Internet technology and broadband has opened the door to all the other channels and broadcasters, and a whole wave of new competitors for Sky. Virgin, BT Sport, ITV can now platform pay-per-view. Sky are now forced to try even harder to retain their customers and to win new ones. They now push higher tech set-top boxes that can record and rewind, but will never be able to outperform a decent PC and the internet. They're lucky most people still use a big TV and a service provider like Sky, and service provider Sky dominates in an ever-evolving world of online access. But there's a new force in sports broadcasting globally, one that's on the cutting edge of technology and can gain crucial advantages quicker than the aging cruiser of Sky. I'm not talking about pirate online streams, something I think should be praised, not criminalised. No, not pirate streams, but legit, paid to subscribe streams. Because of the internet, the whole world has cable. Still, sports events are in the majority sold to broadcasters in national territorial contract packages rather than global coverage to enable the squeeze of every dollar, pound and yen out of every customer. No, not you, the viewer. Sport is not first sold to you, the viewer. The sports promoters sell their product to the network first. The network is both the customer and service provider. DAZN represents the evolution of sports broadcasting, following a similar business model to Sky in different countries. In Germany, Canada and Japan, DAZN was able to outbid competitors for the most popular sports and provide coverage to customers through the latest technology, streaming. A big advantage is that their overheads and costs are far lower than Sky. They don't have to provide set-top boxes, they just handle the website. They don't have to spread their budget around movies and entertainment, they just do sports. They target the market, and it's a growth market. Where Sky are forced to compete with Virgin and Freeview, DAZN don't care who you get your TV channel from. You can get your sport from DAZN. They're really only in direct competition with other live streaming sports subscription services. That's direct competition. And of course, the traditional broadcasters are scrambling to provide these. DAZN's success in Germany, Japan and Canada has led to large investment, and a strategy to implement their same market takeover in America has begun. The question of whether DAZN is a direct competitor for Sky, or whether, like Netflix, Sky will integrate its service, it's currently a moot point because they do not operate in the UK market. The whole question of competition between DAZN and Sky is how this video came about, because of Eddie Hearn's...
Can't just forget about when no one wanted boxing, when it was on its arse. Sky were the only people that were consistently backing the sport.
Eddie Hearn was trying to lick up to Adam Smith and Eddie is very clever. He's not just promoting to you, the public, he's also promoting to Adam, who buys his product. And he was trying to lick up Adam, wasn't he, and say that Sky have always helped boxing, and Matchroom and Sky have got this great relationship. And he's doing that because Adam Smith is cross that Eddie is working for rival company, competitor, DAZN. And as another little diversion here, something else I noticed is that Sky are now putting their fights on YouTube for free a few days after they broadcast them, because they hold those rights, and because it's a direct thumb in the eye to DAZN, who offer you fights on the internet. So that brings us back to DAZN. DAZN chose boxing as an easy entry point into the US market, as they can get broadcast rights to top tier shows regardless of competitors. There's only one Super Bowl, but there are 4 or 5 heavyweight championship belts. Much like BT Sport were able to offer up a competitive package of fights, there's always another promoter or manager to sign up, always another fighter to sign. Eddie Hearn and Oscar de la Hoya may not be the biggest promoter managers in US boxing, but they will certainly do to get things going. De la Hoya brings Mexican fighters and top name Canelo, which is appealing to a reasonable sector of the US market, the Latino community. Hearn brings AJ and other names known across the pond, and an ability to bring a stable of new signings quickly. He can clearly run shows and promote, and was not already tied in to a US broadcast arrangement. They saw his track record in the UK and gave him the money to do the same in the US, which is a smart move by DAZN. Boxing is just the entry point for DAZN though. DAZN will eventually secure rights to the NFL, to the NBA, to the baseball, to the ice hockey, as license agreements are renegotiated and auctioned in coming years. If DAZN can crack America, they will be in a position to outbid Sky for every sport in the UK if they choose, and destroy them in a sporting context. I don't expect them to do exactly that. I think they'll probably sell the company as it reaches a peak and cash in. Maybe they'll sell it to Sky, which in comparison is still a giant. DAZN could reach a deal with Sky to provide their content through Sky. And besides, the UK market is a small pond with one big fish currently in residence. Why fight over scraps? Who knows, certainly DAZN will be in a position to do whatever they want if their business continues to meet their targets. Unlike Netflix, they don't have to pump money into production and hope for a hit. They can simply buy up the best rights packages. So what of it all? Why have I gone on about this? Well, Eddie Hearn says without pay-per-view, you'd can't have top boxing. And it's just not true. DAZN offers a more than viable alternative. And before DAZN, terrestrial television offered a more than viable alternative. So I call it bull. Eddie Hearn said,
When no one wanted boxing, when it was on its arse, Sky were the only people that were consistently backing the sport.
But Sky did not invest in boxing when no one else wanted it. They took it from the masses and hid it behind a paywall when it was thriving. They hid the stars from the public, and people lost interest and lost a connection. And it took a while for boxing to bounce back. The pay-per-view is almost criminal, charging subscribers extra after they've already paid to subscribe. A license to print money or to bleed the hardcore fans. They push their luck with increasingly poor products for premium prices, and it all backfired. Disappointed people said, I'm not buying that shit again. But people were not let down by boxing. Boxing was let down by Sky. Eddie was only saying these things to appease the Sky executives and Adam Smith because the US DAZN deal put strain on their relationship. DAZN's a threat to Sky, and Sky are now pumping out fights on YouTube to steal their thunder. Sky were forced to invest more in boxing only after competition became more relevant, and they were therefore forced to actually try and provide a decent service and not just stranglehold a monopoly. All the way, Eddie Hearn has leveraged his position to bleed Sky for more investment, because the more money going in, the bigger his cut. As part of this, rather than provide real competitive fights, they put in place a safety strategy. Matchroom hype up non-fights and one-sided cards, so the Sky Matchroom fighters will win and keep winning. This sells their personalities, and they milk every penny along the way. They create a soap opera on social media to keep the punters engaged and create that all-important sales narrative. Those stories, the soap opera, that's what keeps the pay-per-view money coming in. Marketing has overtaken quality of sport, and therefore hype jobs can be the biggest and best thing since sliced bread until they're exposed and then the water gets too deep. The grassroots are not getting the investment they need to provide a real healthy sport, to provide top quality athletes. Top players are getting stupidly rich, and we're being forced to pay into their obscene wealth through pay-per-view. Eddie Hearn often says, if you don't like it, don't watch it. But that's not fair. I always liked boxing. I used to watch it all the time. Eubank Ben was a national occasion. We talked about it at school. But Eddie Hearn and his dad stole it from us. I do like it, and I do want to watch it. I just don't want to pay Eddie Hearn, Sky, and Adam Smith for the f***ing privilege. I want to watch it for free, on the internet, or on the BBC, or ITV, like we used to, before the greed, before Hearn and Son found their angle and stitched up the public for their own personal profit. So pay-per-view, I call bullshit. Let boxers earn slightly less than 50 million a fight. Let the people of England and the UK all share in these events. If a fighter earns a more reasonable sum, my granddad, a pensioner who fought in a war, might get to watch the fight for free, and the promoters get less of a cut. So fine, I'd rather have that. I hope you've enjoyed this different video from Bear Friday. If you've got an opinion, leave it in the comments. Of course, this is a video that's a bit different. It's going to incite some opinions. I'd like it if you shared this video to incite those opinions. I'd like it if we could get someone like Hatman engaged in this conversation, and I'd like all your opinions in the comments. A little epilogue. How do we fix this? It's a complex problem. We've already been led so far up this pay tower, it's hard to turn around. Ofcom shows that Sky continues to dominate the UK pay TV market, and it's not just about boxing, it's about content, entertainment, Game of Thrones and all that jazz. But there's one kind of action we could all take collectively. We could kind of strike. Eddie Hearn likes to say, if you don't like it, don't buy it. So how about this? Are you hardcore or are you casual? Because if all the hardcore are going to start taking a stand, and if the real hardcore won't be buying some duff pay-per-view, instead they could watch it on the internet for free stream or wait for the YouTube drop the next day. If we all did that for an event, maybe that will make a dent in their pay-per-view model, and maybe they might be forced to offer more for less. There is an argument for national versus global. How are we going to compete with the American market if we don't do the pay-per-view that America does? How will our shows be of that stature? And I would say remove pay-per-view, put it on ITV or BBC, and Anthony Joshua still sells out Wembley. And that the American market is very different from ours because of the size of the country and the number of people. So maybe we're never going to compete on certain levels, but maybe we don't need to, because we can produce international champions through grassroots funding and support. And that those champions will bring international sport to our shores through their success, not through milking the public. But that's just an idea. This has been Bear Friday. Slay me in the comments.